Welcome everyone to our fireside chat. It's funny it's called fireside because there's no fire in sight, although I am speaking to all of you from New York, and it's very cold in New York. It's basically American Siberia here, so some fire nearby would be quite welcome, but fireside chat is the next best thing I can do right now. My name is Alexei Miller. I'm a co-founder of DataArt, and I'm very happy to welcome you all in as we chat with my guests here about the topic that is interesting, not super exciting, but kind of necessary, and is full of nerves, if you will. Wage inflation, IT services, IT labor wage inflation. Everyone knows that engineers are getting more expensive. Everyone knows that there is tremendous competition for talent all over the world. It's the same is true for US, New Zealand, Ukraine, or Germany. But we wanted today to go one level deeper and understand what exactly is going on. What are the numbers? What should clients and users and employers be thinking about? What is the right way to look at this issue? Because if we just assume that things will continue to get more and more expensive in perpetuity and there's nothing to be done about it, it's kind of a depressing thought. And here at DataArt, we don't like depressing thoughts so much. So we decided to share some of our observations, some of our thought process around this. And I thank all of you for your attention. Joining me today are three guests, two from DataArt and one from Mercer. Gaurav is European consulting leader and senior principal at Mercer, and I appreciate his time. He'll share the global perspective on what's going on with IT labor markets overall. Velikoivanenko is head of HR marketing at DataArt, and the person single-handedly, along with a very large team, of course, responsible for labor market communication and recruitment at DataArt, which is a 6,000 strong IT services provider. And then last but not least, Dmitry Bagrov, managing director with in London, in DataArt's London office, looking after UK and European business. So hopefully between the three of them, they can give us different perspective on this issue. So let's start with some facts. Again, everyone understands that things are getting more expensive, but just how more expensive? What in reality is going on? Gaurav, why don't I ask you to go first and tell us what you see across the markets that you guys are watching? What are the trends? What are the numbers? What are you seeing?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome, Alexei. As you just said, Gaurav Dutt, European consulting leader at Mercer, so preeminent reward and talent global advisory business. Totally agree with you. The competition for talent in the tech sector is hotting up. I think if we look at wage inflation, then it's actually a bit of a mixed bag, and there's a number of different ways to view this. You can see it from the new hire perspective, so new hire versus tenured staff. And I think that's quite important because we're looking at people hired, for instance, in the last year. If we look at that, then there are some huge differentials that we're seeing. So for instance, just to shoot out a few numbers, we're seeing that in Warsaw, new hires at a mid-career level from an engineering background, the differential for new hires compared to tenured staff is 44% at that level. In London, you're just under 30%. In some markets in Eastern Europe, it's around 25 to 30%. And that pattern of new hires versus tenured is being repeated across a number of different markets, whether it's Asia, India, or China, or whether that's the US. There tends to be double-digit differentials between new hire and tenured staff. I think that's definitely one lens to look at it from, Alexei. I think the other bit then that's also quite interesting is that no region, no country, no market actually runs at a consistent rate. It's also a sort of mixed bag depending on which country you're looking at, and also depending on which roles you're looking at. Some command a bit more of a premium than others. But if we were to look at salaries, for instance, going back to 2019 pre-COVID, and we were to look now, let's say 2021, 2022, then we're definitely seeing growth in some markets where it's more so than others. So for instance, I was looking through some of our data and I saw that, again, for that mid-career level engineering background, again, you're looking at nearly a 30% difference, 2019 compared to the latter part of 2021. And it tends to be somewhere north of 15% for Eastern Europe, and perhaps up to around sort of 10%, maybe a little bit more for Western Europe and parts of the US. I'll leave it at that in case you've got any other questions.
Gaurav, thank you. So it seems very clear that it pays to look for a job if you're an engineer in any of those hot labor markets, and not a very appealing thought to many employers who much rather employees stay, but there's no escaping reality. So let me turn to Anna. And Anna, you look after markets that DataArt is active in, several markets in Eastern Europe and in Latin America. What are you seeing? Can you try to put it in numbers? Where I've just said that 30% growth acceleration in the last two or 3 years is something they're seeing in their data. Is this what you're seeing as well? Give us some data.
Yes, Alexei, it is consistent with our data that we have at our strongholds in Latin America and Eastern Europe. The wages for tech people grew about 20 to 30%, depending on the market. And also not only on the market geography-wise, as Gaurav has stated, but also in the view of the split of the tech, meaning that, for example, Scala, being the hottest technology now on the market, is now growing rapidly, whereas such other technologies, which are mostly widespread, like Java or JavaScript or .NET, are also being hot. Or, for example, the newcomers like TypeScript, which are also very high in demand on the market. And of course, they are dragging all the other technologies with them. And we see that many companies, not just us, have grown in different markets, both in Latin America and Eastern Europe. For example, many of our competitors have grown 50+% more, whilst most of the markets have grown from 20 to 25%, meaning that people are just being dragged from one company to another. And now the markets are being, I see in the process of all the employers getting bigger, meaning that top 50 employers are actually getting bigger. Therefore, we see that there is the consolidation trend on the market in terms of employers. And the average attrition rate in Eastern Europe and in tech, and both in Latin America, of course, it varies a little bit, as Gaurav has stated, on the markets. For example, in Western Europe, it might be lower. In the US, it might be higher, but the average number of attrition is about 25%, meaning that anything lower than that is a very good sign of the employer's quantity. So I know that many of our clients are watching this webinar and they're asking themselves a question, like, where I'm at, am I doing well with my people? Well, this is the reference you could use.
Well, 20 to 30% annual salary growth is certainly unsettling, but I promise everyone listening, this will not be just bad news in this webinar. We will, in a few minutes, try and figure out what do we do, and it cannot be the only solution that just to anticipate such rapid growth for years and years to come. Before we turn to that, let me ask Dmitry what he's seeing in his conversations with clients. First of all, number one, is there recognition on the client's part that this is an issue? Is this universally recognized sort of sector by sector? I know you've dozens and dozens of clients relationships across different industry sector. And are you seeing similar trends across? And do you feel that clients you're dealing with are prepared to sort of do something about it and work constructively with their suppliers and with their own HR to move beyond the initial shock of these numbers?
Clients behave differently in a way that everyone is looking for a solution in a situation when there's no obvious solution. But I think in general, the sort of overarching feeling is the markets are heading up, definitely. The interesting aspect is that a lot of the high increase that we see in traditional sort of outsourcing destinations in Eastern Europe, such as Russia, Ukraine, sort of Armenia, Georgia, the increase there seems to be higher because all of a sudden there's a lot more employers. The companies that would traditionally just go through an outsourcing company, such as, I don't know, DataArt, Cyclum, whatever, they would now entertain and in a lot of cases actually go ahead with hiring people directly. And that creates a situation when the labor market not only experiences lack of supply, but actually there's a huge spike in number of players and there's a big spike in demand. So it kind of creates a perfect storm situation, and clients definitely recognize that. The sort of the actions they're taking to handle this vary from accepting that the rates are going to be higher for a certain period of time, trying to establish their own presence in traditional outsourcing destinations in Eastern Europe and beyond, or seeing whether they actually can do something with internal growth. So a lot of companies I'm talking to trying to, I mean, it sounds fantastic in theory, but not everyone knows how to do it in practice, but they're trying to see whether they can work smarter and not pay through the nose for more people. So instead of throwing more resources at the problem, they try to figure out whether they can solve it by maybe adding less people who are more expensive. They would be able to create smarter solutions and the variety of routes that different companies are taking. And it's a very interesting, in a very British sense of that word, a very interesting market to be in at the moment.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Before we turn to solutions, I wanted to follow up on something that Anna mentioned. I think I heard her say that higher wages, higher costs lead to turnover because, as we discussed, it pays to be looking for a job, and the bigger guys, the bigger employers are in better positions to offer more and more attractive packages and so on. So I wonder, in terms of turnover, what are we seeing and what is reasonable to bake in? If you are, hypothetically, an employer who contracts or employs directly a few dozen people, let's say 100 people across several geographies, if you're a hiring manager, what kind of a turnover should you bake in? I wonder, Gaurav, in your practice, are you advising customers to say, well, assume that 30% of your staff will be heading towards the doors every year? Are you operating based on different numbers? How do you advise clients on this?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think, look, we've seen, I don't think it's anything new, right? We've seen high levels of attrition before. I remember about 10 years ago, seeing high levels of attrition north of 20% in India, which means within 5 years, you've gone through your workforce, right? And what they had to do there was almost double down on employee engagement and not necessarily always throw cash at the situation and take a longer term view. I think what we're seeing at the moment, as Dmitry was saying, we're seeing a few extremes, right? So, we've got voluntary turnover. So you look at it in terms of total turnover or voluntary turnover, where you're well into the double digits on the voluntary turnover piece at the moment, 20%, 30%. I think I saw some numbers for the US where it was nearly 28%. I've seen nearly 30, 35% for some Asian markets at the moment. That's high, right? On the other side of it, you've also got a more aggressive sentiment towards hiring from tech companies at the moment. So they know it's a buoyant labor market. They're hiring more aggressively. They're hiring for growth. So as Anna was saying, people are more than happy to jump ship because they also know that they can get paid that little bit more. I think when it comes to normal numbers, right, what is it normally? Usually you tend to find that it's less than 10% on voluntary turnover. In some segments of technology, you might see 5%, you might see 7%, 8%. But I would say it's 2 times to 3 times that in certain markets at the moment.
So this is what I wanted to dig into a little bit, because I remember back in the day, you've mentioned that turnover is not a new concept in and of itself, but I remember there was significant difference between what was considered acceptable or normal or regular in, for example, India, which was a hot market for many, many years, where some vendors have reported 30, 35% annual turnover, versus some of the more emerging markets, such as Eastern Europe, where, as you've mentioned, under 10% has been more of a tradition. And quite frankly, Eastern European suppliers have been quite proud of being able to hold on to their staff a little bit more consistently than some of their competitors. Anna, I wonder if that's holding true, if you were seeing elevated turnover levels across Eastern European markets, and what is the new normal if it exists?
Well, it always going in waves, meaning that usually what we see in data is that one year is a bit higher, another year is a bit lower. Last year being the COVID year, the hottest COVID year we had so far, we had one of the lowest, let's say, benchmarks for attrition throughout the market, and especially for DataArt, we had it at the level of 7% for senior staff, which is incredibly low. Well, this year is a bit more active, I would say, in terms of, again, different factors, those that you've already mentioned. And also, for example, other employers such as startups have no other way of actually getting things done but hire seniors, because they don't have internal model of growth, they don't have an internal labor market for themselves, therefore they're spiking the salaries, and therefore people are jumping ship. But I would say that at the moment the average is about 20-25%, both for Latin America and Eastern Europe. And if we talk about product and startups, that might be a little bit higher depending on their performance, because they also depend largely on the product performance of their own.
So then the worst question of the evening, I promise, goes to Dmitry, which is, how do you explain to clients that 20-25% turnover and rising costs are normal? Where do clients find silver lining in this?
Thank you, Alexei. Can always count on you.
Anytime.
It's a bit of a balancing act, because it really depends what kind of clients you're talking to. In a lot of cases, what I try to do is I try to talk in terms of outcomes rather than in terms of pure numbers like staff turnover. The point I usually try to make is the staff turnover has always been there, and sort of wage inflation has always been there. The point is whether the company you are trying to partner with is actually capable of handling the extremities of this situation. And if the company can do that, or the client itself actually has capacity and experience in handling the sort of the waves of differences, then it's an entirely different game. You should be looking not at the numbers. You should be rather looking at what was happening, for example, during the last crisis, how the company in question handled the financial crisis, how they handled the dot-coms collapse, if they were around back then. If you're looking at particular geographies, there were different situations in different markets which were localized for these particular geographies. So I think my explanation usually rotates around, let's look not at the spot numbers now, but let's try, as hard as it is, let's try to look beyond what is happening now and what was happening before, and what is likely to happen in the future. So if the turnover rate is around 20-25%, then the question is not how you're going to avoid that, because it's impossible. That's what the market is. The question is, how are you going to preserve knowledge? How do you factor in the change in personnel? And these are usually questions that, when you ask them, they usually start discussion, which is a lot more reasonable than, can you guarantee that none of my project team is going to leave within the next year? Of course, I cannot guarantee that. I cannot chain people to their desks, but that's not the right question.
Fair point. 20 years ago, we were already taught in the university when I was back there that you can't just throw bodies on the IT problem. You have to work smarter. You have to organize teams and projects in a certain way to generate success. And I think your point that clients and employers should focus on the outcomes versus the sheer numbers on the team is a very good one. And I wanted to follow up with Anna on this. Is it seen in terms of how teams are composed, in terms of how people are prepared to work? Is this one of the recommendations that you're giving internally to your stakeholder? Perhaps better balance between senior engineers and more junior engineers, implement better training programs. Is this sort of recognized that you have to work smarter, not just based on sheer numbers?
Yes, totally. I fully agree with Dmitry on this. And I believe that work is not solely based on one pillar of your economic outcome out of your career. There are also other pillars, for example, like well-being and professional development. And again, as an employer, we can work on three of them. And therefore, if we have people who we want to retain, we need to understand how they want to develop, because they will leave unless they develop themselves. And that means different things for different people. For certain people, that means double qualification. For other people, that means that they want to train juniors and they want to try themselves as speakers, as authors. They want to start another capacity building. They want to have some R&D. They want to have some experiments. And therefore, I think that by investing into internal labor market and also by creating positions that do not exist in the market so far, we can actually work smarter as employers and as people who service the clients by making our business model stronger. And another thing, what we can do also as an employer, and the thing that I really recommend our stakeholders and to everybody in the market, is to treat your internal labor market and external labor market equally. Meaning that now average middle engineer has about 3 offers on their hands, and you need to act fast. You don't have more than 1 week. Therefore, if this person is applying somewhere, most likely they will have not more than 2 interviews. We are far beyond test cases and tech tests time, meaning that people just have 2 interviews and that's it. Therefore, us as employers, we should be faster with people who we want to retain. If they come with a counter offer, we need to act fast. Can we make an all-in-one interview with another project? So can we treat this person as another person from the market? Can we be more flexible with this person to work on their well-being support? Can we come up with something creative, like short-term relocation to a different climate if they want to? Could we invest in infrastructure? Could we treat remote as a default option for those people who want to live somewhere further? And also, as we know from experience now, that co-location does not mean team happiness anymore, and DataArt has been very strong at this. And therefore, we believe that those who have already invested a lot into their both internal and external employer branding, now it's the time to capitalize on it, meaning that if you have invested a lot into it, then this is the time to prove that you can act smart on the market and you can finally reap off on all the investment that you already made.
I can, if you don't mind, Alexei, just one addition to that. I think one of the aspects which is often overlooked is how do you treat people who actually leave? I mean, if you have 20% turnover, then it's a huge amount of people who are no longer working for your company. And paradoxically, I haven't seen a lot which were concentrating on how to turn people who don't work for you anymore into your ambassadors. Because people leave for a number of reasons, and not necessarily they leave because of poor working conditions or lower salary than the rest of the markets. They can leave for career opportunities. They can leave because they want to try themselves in an entirely different industry. They can leave because they want to work for a product company versus service company. And if you part with these people on good terms, suddenly you have a lot of ambassadors out there who are saying, yeah, I used to work for this company. I left because I wanted to explore, another opportunity in my career. But it's a great place to work, by all means. If your career at the right point, go and work. I think that's something that is well within work smarter, not harder remit, and very often is overlooked.
Yeah, it almost goes to extend Anna's point that not only you should treat your external market and your internal market as the same, but the part of external market that are your ex-employees is part of the ecosystem, no matter how you look at it, and you have to be you cannot afford to ignore that. Gaurav, let me turn to you. This point kind of goes goes not against, but sort of together with the point that you started with, which is there's a huge discrepancy in money right now between the external offers and the internal offer. And I think Anna's suggestion to treat those markets the same, if you're a smart employer, is the way to address it, but it's expensive. I wonder, what advice do you give your clients who are faced with that problem? How do you set the stage for a solution for them? What advice do you give them?
Yeah, so I think typically the companies that have the best retention rates or even attraction rates, right, give their employees a better sense of purpose and fulfillment in their work, right? I think we all acknowledge that. I think at tech companies, it's about sort of leveraging that irresistible proposition whereby, yes, we're competitive on pay. We're even competitive on target total cash, and you get plenty of equity and ownership in the game. But actually, if you come here, you can work on the next big thing, right? I think that's a critical thing. I think what we're seeing at the moment with a lot of our data is that when people are leaving, they might be citing dissatisfaction with pay. But going back to what Dmitry said, if you actually run the data or the information sort of backwards and you figure out actually, is it dissatisfaction with pay that they're actually leaving for? Is it something else? You might see in the numbers and in your data that actually there's been a few other changes that have taken place. Maybe it's a new manager that's come in, a manager that's come from an outside organization, doesn't really understand the culture. Employees become dissatisfied. They might tell you it's pay, but it could be due to limited career advancement. We're seeing a lot of people moving on because of burnout, work-life balance at the moment. Our mantra really is that cash is always short-term fix, race to the bottom in a way, because someone else will always pay more than you. You've got to look at mission, purpose, fulfillment. You've got to get cash right. You've got to be there or thereabouts. But I think you've got to make sure that the other parts of the employee proposition also stack up. So we do a lot of listening exercises with our clients, try and find out what is it that employees actually want and value. I've done a lot of work where we've put in super generous equity programs. No one understands it. They don't value it.
Alexei, you're on mute.
Oh, it's very interesting. Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left. In the remaining time, I want to get very quick opinions on you on a couple of things that may be way out there in terms of the future, but I'm curious to get this panel's opinions together. First, is the office dead? COVID obviously sent everyone home, and now employees can safely hire anyone everywhere, everyone anywhere. Will this focus on working together in the office return? And very quickly, like in 10 seconds each, Dmitry, why don't you go first?
I'm in the office. It's not dead yet.
Enough said. Anna, what do you think?
As the old model of just a lot of tables, being stuck together is dead, but it is definitely going to be rejuvenated as a new space for collaboration.
Fair enough. Gaurav, what do your clients
both.
say? What do you say?
But I think very much both hybrid. I've got some clients that are full remote, but generally it's hybrid.
I see. Cool. And my other question is, I promise, even more way out there, which is, there's been talk in the industry for years and years about all sorts of ways to automate software engineers out of existence. Low code, no code platforms. There's been a proliferation of that, basically trying and failing for the most part to render engineering profession unnecessary. Judging by this discussion, engineers are in higher demand than ever before and cost a lot more than ever before. That whole project is not succeeding. But do you think it will? Other tools in the horizon that may be at long last? I personally hope not, but maybe you'll disagree. Kind of replace the need for engineers in the opposite direction. Gaurav, what do you think?
Yeah, I think as we've seen with a lot of other areas of expertise, maybe the job evolves. Maybe you start to break it down into its individual components, and it's just perhaps done and delivered differently. I think that's where I see it going, as opposed to the whole thing just being coded out.
And do you see increased demand in the market for low code, no code platforms, and what do you think of this?
believe that we should be frank with ourselves. We're not hiring the same engineers we've been hiring 10 years ago. Coding as a sole skill is, of course, redundant. I mean, now everybody, both the scientists and the children and even people in the most non-tech jobs learn to code because it's a must for many professions. But we will never stop trying as a humanity to solve the problems with technologies. And therefore, our engineers are so much in demand because these are not the same engineers who could just code. They are trying to solve a lot of problems with technology, and this is on the rise.
Well said. So Dmitry, finally, to finish with you, will your children be Java engineers or not engineers at all?
I think I think it's a little bit unfair to say that there's a lot of ways to code without coding, because it's not, in reality, it's not coding, it's building something using pre-made blocks. And every time there's a massive change in society or in business or any, in life in general, you need to build new blocks. So my opinion is engineers would not go anywhere. It's just their job would be slightly different with every change that we face.
Ever the optimist. Let's all hope that is the case. I thank you all for the time. We promised to keep this brief, and half hour flew by very quickly, at least for me. I appreciate everyone's comments and everyone's time. Thank you sincerely, Gaurav, Anna, and Dmitry. And for our audience, I promise this is not the last time. Anything you're interested for us to speculate or share some insight onto, shoot us a note, and we'll be happy to share. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day. Cheers.
Thank you, Alexei.